Something profound has shifted within your reality recently, hasn't it? You can feel it, even if you cannot yet find the precise words to describe the sensation. It is a subtle vibration, a hum beneath the surface of your daily life. You have started to perceive patterns that are far too intricate, far too precise, to be dismissed as mere chance. Conversations seem to deliver exactly the message you needed to hear in that exact moment, as if the person speaking was reading from a script written by your own soul. You are encountering people and situations that feel orchestrated, arranged by an invisible hand, with a timing so impeccable it feels almost unsettling. Books fall open to the specific page containing the answer to a question you have been holding in your heart for weeks. Strangers approach you on the street or in coffee shops, offering guidance or resources you required without you ever speaking a word of your need. The reality around you is responding to you differently now. This is not happening occasionally or sporadically anymore. It is happening constantly. It is a relentless stream of meaningful coincidence. You must understand that what you are experiencing right now is not luck. It is not some basic manifestation technique finally taking root after years of trying. This is something far deeper and far more ancient. What is occurring within your field is known as Quantum Archetype Activation. This is a specific configuration of your consciousness aligning with a massive, pre-existing pattern in the quantum field. When this alignment locks into place, it creates a coherent signal. A frequency powerful enough to organize circumstances, encounters, and events around you with a level of precision that makes the concept of randomness impossible to maintain as a logical explanation. You have to stop looking at archetypes as simple symbols or literary metaphors. An archetype is an actual geometric pattern existing within the quantum field. It is a probability distribution that has been shaped by collective consciousness across vast stretches of time. It exists as a tractor state, a magnetic groove in the ether that your individual consciousness can align with. When your personal frequency aligns sufficiently with one of these archetypal patterns, activation occurs. It is like a key turning in a lock. Once activated, the archetype begins to function as an organizing principle in your life. It does not control your reality like a puppet master, but rather it influences the probability distribution of your life so consistently that your existence transforms from a chaotic series of random events into a seamless flow of meaningful synchronicities. You cease to be a passive observer watching life happen to you. You become a participant in a grand cosmic dance. Most human beings live their entire lives without ever activating a quantum archetype clearly enough to experience this sustained state of flow. They exist in a reality where events seem disconnected and random. They live in a world where circumstances feel chaotic, where meaning must be forced upon experience rather than found inherent in the patterns reality presents. This is not because the archetypal patterns do not exist for them. The patterns are always there in the quantum field, waiting. It is because their consciousness remains too scattered, too conflicted, and too identified with limiting small programs to align coherently with the archetypal frequency. They are broadcasting a weak static signal. It is filled with noise. The quantum field cannot respond to static. It needs a clear command. Without that clear signal, there is no activation, no sustained flow, and life is experienced as a tumble of accidents. However, when consciousness develops, through dedicated practice, through deep healing, through the fires of crisis, or through whatever path leads you to internal coherence, eventually, a specific archetype wakes up. It activates. This is not always something you choose consciously with your logical mind. Often, archetypal activation occurs without any conscious intention whatsoever. It happens simply because your consciousness has naturally aligned with a pattern that matches its developed frequency. You vibrate at the level of the pattern, and the pattern responds. Suddenly, the synchronicities intensify. It is like turning up the volume on the universe. Circumstances organize themselves meaningfully. Events connect with a precision that reveals an underlying intelligence. Reality stops feeling random and starts feeling like a living symbol language, where everything means something, where nothing is an accident, and where the quantum field is continuously arranging your experience to align with the archetypal pattern your consciousness has activated. Can you feel whether an archetype has activated for you? The signs are absolutely unmistakable once you understand what indicates true activation versus ordinary, fleeting manifestation. If reality is organizing around you with consistent precision, you are in the flow. If life feels like you are moving through a predetermined choreography that you are discovering rather than creating, the activation has begun. If events connect meaningfully enough that you have completely stopped believing in coincidence, the archetype is alive within you. Recognizing this activation changes everything about how you navigate this dimension and what becomes possible through conscious alignment with the power orchestrating your experience. Quantum mechanics gives us the language to explain this mechanism. Archetypes exist as coherent standing waves in the quantum field. They are probability distributions shaped by the focus of collective consciousness over thousands of years. These patterns function as attractor states. When your individual consciousness aligns with an archetypal pattern sufficiently, a phenomenon called resonance occurs. That resonance creates a strong, coherent signal in the quantum field that affects probability distributions consistently rather than randomly. Circumstances do not manifest through mechanical causation, like one billiard ball hitting another. Circumstances emerge from the probability field, collapsing into patterns aligned with the frequency you are broadcasting. The synchronicities you are seeing are not magic. They are physics. They are the quantum field responding to a coherent archetypal signal consistently enough that meaningful patterns emerge from the noise. Ancient traditions knew these archetypes as gods, spirits, or celestial patterns. They used different names for the same phenomenon that quantum physics now describes as coherent structures in the probability field. Mystics aligned with these patterns through ritual, devotion, and intense practice designed to attune their consciousness to a specific frequency. Modern understanding simply reveals the mechanism behind the mysticism. Archetypes are quantum patterns. Activation is resonance. Synchronistic flow is the field responding. It is different language, but it is the exact same truth. And that truth is this: once a quantum archetype activates, reality organizes around that pattern with a precision that makes accidents impossible and synchronicities inevitable. Take a deep breath right now. Inhale that truth. What comes next will explain exactly what a quantum archetype is at its fundamental level. We will explore why some archetypes activate while others remain dormant, how to consciously align with an active archetype to maximize this flow, and ultimately, what this activation is preparing your consciousness for. You are not imagining that life has become a meaningful choreography. Life has become choreographed, not by an external controller, but by the quantum field responding to the pattern you are holding. Your consciousness has activated this through achieving sufficient coherence and frequency alignment. Understanding this transforms your confusion into clarity. It turns the random into the orchestrated. It turns the accidental into the meaningful. Before we can identify which specific archetype has activated within you, you need to understand what a quantum archetype actually is at the most fundamental level. Mainstream psychology often treats archetypes merely as symbols, as mental concepts, or as frameworks for understanding the human psyche. That is an incomplete understanding. That is looking at the map and thinking it is the terrain. Archetypes are not just mental constructs inside your brain. Archetypes are actual energetic structures in the quantum field. They are coherent probability distributions shaped by collective consciousness across millennia. They exist as real structures affecting how reality manifests for any consciousness aligned with them. A quantum archetype is a stable pattern in the probability field created through countless consciousnesses, focusing on similar themes, qualities, and expressions across time. When millions of humans throughout history focus on the energy of the warrior, on courage, discipline, protection, and strength, that collective focus creates a deep groove, a coherent pattern in the morphic field. This pattern becomes self-reinforcing. New consciousnesses can align with this existing pattern much more easily than they can create a brand new one. Eventually, the pattern stabilizes as an archetype probability distribution in the quantum field that remains coherent across time. It becomes a station that you can tune into. It functions as an attractor state, much like a gravity well attracts matter. The archetypal pattern attracts circumstances, encounters, and events that match its frequency. When a consciousness aligns with the healer archetype, for example, the quantum field responds by drastically increasing the probability of healing-related synchronicities. People seeking healing suddenly appear in your reality. Opportunities to facilitate healing manifest out of thin air. Information regarding new modalities arrives through unexpected channels. This is not because the archetype is controlling reality mechanically. It is because the archetype affects probability distributions consistently, making aligned experiences statistically more probable than would occur through random chance. This explains why certain life patterns repeat across individuals who have never met. Different people activating the same archetype will experience similar synchronistic patterns. The details will not be identical, but the structure will match. All consciousnesses aligned with the teacher archetype will notice students appearing. They will see teaching opportunities manifesting. They will experience knowledge transferring through unexpected means. The pattern repeats because they are all aligned with the same archetypal probability distribution in the quantum field. They are not copying each other. They are independently resonating with the same quantum structure, causing the field to respond with structurally similar synchronicities, even though the surface details vary. You must realize that archetypes are not roles you play. They are not identities you adopt or costumes you wear. Archetypes are frequencies you embody. When your consciousness achieves a specific frequency configuration through development, healing, or practice, that frequency naturally resonates with the archetypal pattern in the quantum field that matches that configuration. Activation is not about choosing an archetype with your mind. Activation is your consciousness developing to a frequency where archetypal resonance occurs automatically. You do not decide to activate the creator archetype. You develop your creativity, your originality, and your generative capacity to a level where your consciousness frequency matches the creator pattern, and the resonance activates naturally. Multiple archetypes exist simultaneously in the quantum field. There is the warrior, the healer, the teacher, the creator, the lover, the sage, the fool, the sovereign, and countless others. Each one represents a different coherent pattern in the probability field, shaped by collective focus across time. An individual consciousness does not activate all archetypes equally. Your specific consciousness aligns most strongly with one or two primary archetypes based on the frequency configuration you have developed in this lifetime. Those primary archetypes become the dominant influences organizing your synchronistic flow. Secondary archetypes might activate partially, but the primary archetype creates the strongest resonance and generates the most consistent patterns. Understanding the archetype as a quantum pattern rather than just a psychological symbol reveals why activation creates such a dramatic shift in your experience. You are not just thinking differently about yourself. You are broadcasting a coherent signal into the quantum field that matches a stable pattern in the field. This creates a resonance that affects probability distributions consistently. The quantum field responds to a coherent archetypal signal the way a tuning fork responds to a matching frequency. It creates a sustained resonance that organizes experience around the pattern. That organization is what creates the flow where nothing feels accidental, because everything is arising from the quantum field, responding to the activated frequency. There are specific signs that confirm a quantum archetype has activated, differentiating it from occasional synchronicity or successful manifestation. These signs operate in your direct experience right now. Recognizing them validates what is happening while revealing which archetype has activated based on the nature of the synchronicities appearing. The first sign is synchronicity clustering around a specific theme. Random synchronicities might involve any topic, but archetypal synchronicities cluster meaningfully. If the healer archetype is activated, your synchronicities will consistently involve healing, helping, and therapeutic encounters. If the creator archetype is activated, your synchronicities will consistently involve creative opportunities, artistic expression, and generative projects. This thematic clustering is the fingerprint. It reveals which archetypal pattern is organizing your experience. Track your synchronicities for 1 week. If a clear theme emerges, the archetype aligned with that theme has likely activated. The second sign is people responding to you as an archetypal figure before they even know you personally. Strangers will treat you as a teacher, a healer, a leader, or a creator, whatever archetype has activated, without you ever having claimed that role explicitly. They are projecting archetypal qualities onto you because they are unconsciously sensing the frequency you are broadcasting. When the sage archetype activates, people will ask you for wisdom, even if you have not presented yourself as a wise person. When the warrior archetype activates, people will seek your protection, even if you have not offered it. Others perceive the archetype through your frequency before they know the biographical details that might justify that perception. The third sign is opportunities manifesting that align perfectly with the archetypal expression. If the creator archetype is activated, creative opportunities appear. Invitations to collaborate, projects requiring creative input, and platforms for expression show up. If the sovereign archetype activates, leadership opportunities manifest. Groups needing direction, situations requiring authority, positions of responsibility appearing out of nowhere. The phenomena do not stop there. The rabbit hole goes much deeper. We move now to the fourth sign, which is perhaps the most practical and unsettling of them all. The sudden appearance of resources exactly when your archetypal expression demands them. Have you noticed this? You identify a need, perhaps a specific piece of arcane knowledge required for your teaching, or a particular tool necessary for your creation, and suddenly, a book containing that exact knowledge practically falls into your hands. A stranger offers you the precise tool you envisioned. An ally enters your life at the exact moment their skill set becomes crucial for your mission. The timing of these arrivals is too perfect, too consistent to be dismissed as mere good fortune. We are talking about resources manifesting synchronistically to support the archetype that is trying to express itself through you. These resources arrive through channels you could never have predicted and certainly could not have controlled with your conscious mind. This is the quantum field organizing the material world around the activated archetype. It is as if the universe itself is conspiring to fund your mission, providing the logistics for the divine play you are starring in. Then there is the fifth sign, which acts as a guidance system, the dissolution of obstacles that would block your archetypal expression, simultaneous with the intensification of obstacles that would divert you from it. This is a fascinating mechanism. Resistance against your true path seemingly collapses overnight. Doors that were locked suddenly swing wide open. The path aligned with the archetype becomes effortless. Conversely, any attempt to pursue a path that is incompatible with the activated archetype meets with increasing, almost comedic resistance. The quantum field is not forcing you into the archetype against your will. Rather, the field is creating a hydrodynamic flow, arranging conditions that make the archetypal expression the path of least resistance while making diversion incredibly difficult. It is nudging your consciousness toward alignment through the synchronistic arrangement of circumstances. It supports the flow of the archetype and creates friction against anything that is a distraction. If you find that your old life is suddenly impossible to maintain, while a new, scary but exciting path is opening up effortlessly, that is the archetype steering the ship. The sixth sign is the emergence of symbolic patterns in your environment. These are external reflections of the internal theme. If the warrior archetype has come online within you, do not be surprised if imagery of swords, shields, battles, or armor begins to appear in completely unexpected contexts. In artwork you walk past, in conversations you overhear, in the media that randomly autoplays on your screen. If the lover archetype is active, symbols of union, roses, duality, and connection will manifest consistently. Skeptics will call this attention bias. They are wrong. These symbols appear with a frequency and a specificity that suggests external orchestration rather than selective attention. The quantum field is a mirror. It reflects the archetypal pattern you are holding through environmental symbols. The world is speaking to you in a dream language, confirming the frequency you are embodying. And speaking of dreams, the seventh sign takes place when you close your eyes. Your dream state intensifies with clear archetypal imagery and direct guidance. Archetypal figures, wise old men, great mothers, warriors, kings, appear in your sleep, offering specific direction. Scenarios play out that show you the path forward. These are not vague, foggy dreams. They are vivid, memorable, and clearly connected to the situations you are facing in your waking life. This occurs because archetypal activation affects consciousness at the quantum level, which includes the dreaming state. The archetype does not clock out when you go to sleep. It continues organizing your dream content to provide guidance through the symbolic language that your consciousness can access more easily when the rational ego is offline. I want you to pause for a moment, reflect on this. Which of these signs are currently flooding your experience? Is it the thematic clustering? Is it people projecting an identity onto you? Is it the resources appearing out of thin air? Acknowledgement is powerful. When you validate these signs, you tell your consciousness, yes, the archetype is active. Yes, this synchronistic flow is real. You confirm to the quantum field that you are listening. This validation strengthens the signal. It confirms that the field is organizing your experience around the pattern you have aligned with. But a burning question remains. Why now? Why has this quantum archetype activated specifically at this point in your development rather than 10 years ago or 10 years from now? You must understand that activation is not a random occurrence. It is not a stroke of mystical luck or grace bestowed upon the chosen few. Activation happens at a very specific developmental stage when three critical conditions align simultaneously. The activation occurs when your consciousness frequency reaches the level of archetypal resonance, when your internal conflicts resolve sufficiently to allow a coherent signal, and when your soul's purpose aligns with the archetypal expression, creating an evolutionary imperative. Let us break down these triggers so you can understand the mechanics of your own awakening. The first trigger is frequency elevation crossing a threshold. Every archetype exists at a specific frequency range within the quantum field. If your consciousness is operating below that range, stuck in fear, shame, or apathy, you cannot activate the archetype no matter how hard you intend or desire it. It is a matter of physics, not worthiness. But when your consciousness develops, through meditation, healing work, or navigating life's crises, your frequency naturally elevates. When that elevation crosses the threshold of the archetype, resonance happens automatically. It is exactly like tuning a radio. You do not create the music. The station is already broadcasting. You simply tune your receiver to match the signal, and suddenly, the music plays. Archetypal activation is your consciousness finally matching the frequency that has always been there, allowing a resonance that was simply impossible at lower states. The second trigger is coherence achieving critical mass. Frequency alone is not enough. You can have high moments but still be a scattered mess. If your consciousness is fragmented, you cannot maintain a signal strong enough for clear activation. Internal conflicts, contradictory beliefs, unintegrated trauma, and a fragmented identity create noise. They create interference patterns that scramble the broadcast. But when your healing progresses, when you integrate those fragmented parts, your internal alignment strengthens. You become a laser instead of a light bulb. Your consciousness begins to broadcast a coherent signal without constant static. That coherence allows the archetype to activate clearly rather than flickering inconsistently like a faulty light bulb. The third trigger is the demand of your soul purpose. This goes beyond your individual personality. Activation serves an evolutionary purpose. The collective consciousness needs this archetype to be expressed through you. When the timing is right for you to express a particular quality or capacity that serves the whole, the archetype activates regardless of whether your little ego feels ready. A crisis might force this activation by eliminating all your other comfortable alternatives. An opportunity might catalyze it by presenting a situation that demands an archetypal response. The collective field itself creates an evolutionary pressure, a demand for activation to occur because your expression is required for the larger unfolding of the human story. The fourth trigger is shadow integration, releasing blocked archetypal energy. This is crucial. Often, an archetype remains dormant not because your frequency is too low, but because aspects of your shadow are blocking access. The warrior archetype might be blocked by your unintegrated fear of violence. The lover archetype might be blocked by repressed sexuality or shame. The teacher archetype might be blocked by wounds around authority. When you do the shadow work, when you integrate those dark basements of the psyche, you do not just remove a blockage. You transform that shadow energy into fuel. The energy that was trapped in holding down your trauma is released and becomes available for archetypal expression. It is like unlocking a massive battery that was previously draining you. The fifth trigger is an initiation experience. This is often a major life transition. The death of a loved one, a brutal breakup, a career collapse, or a spiritual emergency. These events function as initiations that crack the shell of the ego. Initiation breaks the ego's rigid control, dissolves your limiting identity, and creates a rupture, an opening, where the archetypal pattern can emerge from the unconscious into conscious expression. What feels like a devastating crisis at the moment often reveals itself later as the necessary disruption that allowed the archetype to breathe. It serves your evolution beyond the limitations your ego was desperately trying to maintain. Finally, the sixth trigger is resonance through contact. This happens when you meet someone who is already expressing the activated archetype. A consciousness that fully embodies an archetype radiates that frequency like a beacon. When you encounter them, their frequency can catalyze the activation in your own consciousness if you are close to the threshold. It is not that they are doing magic on you, it is that the resonance with their activated pattern shakes your dormant archetype awake. This is why certain teachers, mentors, or even chance meetings with powerful strangers can trigger a sudden shift. Their embodiment provides the spark that ignites the fuel waiting within you. Understanding these triggers reveals that archetype activation is never a mystical accident. It is a mechanic of consciousness. It is the natural result of your development, reaching a stage where frequency, coherence, purpose, integration, initiation, or resonance creates the perfect storm for the pattern to emerge. You did not randomly receive a gift. You developed to a point where this activation became the inevitable result of the evolution your consciousness has undergone. Recognizing this empowers you. It reveals how to maintain the activation and potentially how to activate even more archetypes through continued development. Let me share a direct transmission from my own experience to ground this in reality. 4 years ago, my own quantum archetype activated. It happened during an intensive retreat focused on clarifying my life's purpose. I had been a seeker for years, practicing meditation daily, healing significant layers of past trauma, and achieving a relatively high frequency and internal coherence. Yet, despite all that work, no clear archetype had activated. My life still felt somewhat random. Synchronicities occurred occasionally, little winks from the universe, but they were inconsistent. They were sparks, not a fire. Then, during this retreat, something fundamental shifted in the bedrock of my consciousness. Over the course of 3 days, the synchronicities did not just increase, they exploded. It was as if a dam had broken. Every conversation I had delivered the exact insight I needed at that precise second. Every meditation session revealed clear, crystalline guidance. Every external circumstance arranged itself perfectly. A pattern began to emerge from the noise, loud and undeniable. Teaching, wisdom sharing, consciousness transmission. When I returned from that retreat, the flow did not stop. It accelerated. People started approaching me as a teacher before I had ever claimed that role or put it on a business card. Teaching opportunities manifested constantly. Invitations to speak, requests for guidance, and platforms for sharing emerged without me pursuing them. Resources appeared exactly when the teaching required them. Books, insights, specific examples and stories arrived through unexpected channels right when I needed them to prepare a lesson. Obstacles that had previously blocked my ability to teach simply dissolved, while obstacles intensified whenever I tried to pursue other directions. The archetypal pattern was unmistakable. The teacher archetype had activated, and reality was organizing around that activation with a precision that made randomness impossible to maintain as an explanation. The most disorienting part of this process was recognizing how much of this was being orchestrated beyond my conscious control or understanding. I had set intentions before. I had practiced manifestation. I had experienced serendipity. But archetypal activation was different. This was not me trying to create specific outcomes with my mind. This was the quantum field organizing circumstances around the archetypal pattern I had aligned with. I was not controlling the synchronicities. I was witnessing them emerge from the field, responding to the frequency I was broadcasting. The agency was not mine alone. It was distributed between my consciousness and the quantum field's response. What I learned through that process completely transformed my understanding of manifestation and synchronicity. Before activation, I thought manifestation was about controlling thoughts and visualizing specific outcomes to get what the ego wanted. But archetypal activation revealed the higher truth. Manifestation, at its highest level, is about aligning with an archetypal pattern in the quantum field and allowing the field to organize experience around that pattern. It requires less control and more surrender, less forcing and more flowing, less ego-driven creating and more archetypal unfolding. The synchronicities were not random blessings bestowed by a capricious deity. They were the quantum field's natural, mechanical response to a coherent archetypal signal. My consciousness was finally broadcasting consistently enough for the field to respond, orchestrating experience around the pattern. This activation also revealed my purpose with a clarity that was impossible to access before. Prior to this, purpose felt like an abstract concept. I want to help people, or I want to create something meaningful. After activation, purpose became concrete. It became geometric. Embody the teacher archetype. Transmit consciousness wisdom. Support others in their awakening. The archetype is the purpose. It does not limit expression. It focuses expression through a specific frequency and pattern that serves collective evolution. My role is not to decide what to do every morning. My role is to express the activated archetype as clearly and powerfully as possible, trusting that the quantum field will orchestrate the circumstances around that expression. This is what I wish someone had explained to me before my activation occurred. Archetypal activation is not you gaining control over reality to manifest your ego's desires. It is your consciousness aligning with a pattern larger than your ego, a pattern that exists to serve collective evolution, and the quantum field responding to that alignment. Sometimes, the synchronicities manifest what the ego wants, but sometimes they manifest what the consciousness needs for evolution, even when the ego resists it. The organizing principle is not your preference. The organizing principle is the archetypal pattern serving a purpose beyond individual gratification. Your activation might have occurred differently than mine. You might be activating the warrior, the healer, or the creator. The circumstances will differ and the timeline will vary, but the core dynamic is identical. Your consciousness developed a frequency and coherence where resonance occurred, and the quantum field started organizing experience around that pattern. Once you recognize that this activation has occurred, everything changes about how you navigate reality. To work with an activated quantum archetype consciously, rather than just unconsciously experiencing the flow, you need to develop specific capacities. These capacities allow you to deliberately align with the pattern. Activation creates synchronicities automatically, but conscious alignment amplifies the flow, clarifies the expression, and allows you to cooperate with the orchestration rather than viewing it as a mysterious force beyond your influence. The first capacity you must develop is recognizing the archetypal signature in your synchronicities. Every synchronicity carries a signature, a flavor, indicating which archetype is active. If opportunities consistently involve healing, the healer archetype is organizing your experience. If they involve creative expression, it is the creator. Practice identifying the theme in each meaningful coincidence. That recognition reveals which archetype you are aligned with and allows you to consciously strengthen that alignment. The second capacity is expressing archetypal qualities deliberately. The archetype activates because your consciousness achieved a matching frequency, but the activation strengthens through conscious expression. If the warrior archetype is activated, do not just wait for battles. Deliberately practice courage, discipline, and protection in your daily life. If the sage is activated, deliberately cultivate wisdom, contemplation, and perspective. This conscious expression strengthens the signal you are sending into the quantum field, increasing the synchronistic flow around the pattern. You are not pretending to be the archetype. You are consciously embodying the frequency your consciousness is already aligned with. The third capacity is following synchronistic guidance even when the ego resists. This is the hardest one. The activated archetype organizes circumstances toward expression and evolutionary purpose, not necessarily toward your comfort. Sometimes the synchronicities point in directions the ego does not want to go, a relationship ending to clear space for work, a career change requiring a leap of faith, a path demanding a sacrifice the ego fears making. You must practice following the guidance, especially when it is uncomfortable. The archetype serves a larger purpose than your safety. Following the guidance allows the expression to unfold fully. The fourth capacity is releasing outcomes while maintaining alignment. The ego wants to control how the archetype expresses and what manifestations appear, but attempting to control the how creates interference with the quantum field's orchestration. Practice holding clear alignment, embodying the qualities, and expressing the pattern, but release your attachment to the specific result. The field orchestrates more effectively than your ego can plan. Releasing control allows the field's intelligence to organize circumstances that are optimal for the archetype, rather than limiting manifestations to what your small mind can imagine. The fifth capacity is integrating the archetypal shadow. Every archetype has light and shadow aspects. The warrior has courage, but also the potential for violence. The teacher has wisdom, but also the trap of arrogance. The lover has connection, but also the shadow of possession. Practice recognizing the shadow aspects of your activated archetype and integrating them consciously. Unintegrated shadow creates unconscious interference. Integrated shadow becomes additional fuel. The shadow is not the enemy of the archetype. It is unintegrated energy waiting to strengthen your expression. The sixth capacity is communicating with the archetype directly. An activated archetype is not just an abstract pattern, it has intelligence, it has a purpose. It is a living field of information accessible through your consciousness. Practice dialogue with the archetype through meditation, journaling, or contemplation. Ask the archetype what it needs expressed. Ask for guidance about direction. Ask about its purpose. It can communicate through intuition, imagery, a felt sense, or direct knowing. This communication provides clarity that your operating consciousness could not access alone. You are not creating a fantasy. You are accessing the intelligence of the quantum pattern you are aligned with. Right now, I want you to commit to practicing just one of these capacities. If you have recognized your activated archetype, deliberately express one core quality of that archetype for the next 24 hours. If you are the warrior, practice courage. If you are the healer, practice compassion. If you are the creator, practice originality. If you are the sage, practice wisdom. That deliberate expression acts as a signal booster. It strengthens the archetypal signal, amplifies the synchronistic flow, and deepens your alignment with the pattern organizing your experience. The practice is not about forcing a role. The practice is consciously embodying the frequency your consciousness is already aligned with, allowing the activation to strengthen and the synchronistic orchestration to intensify through your conscious cooperation. However, you must be warned. Something profound and sometimes difficult happens after the quantum archetype stabilizes. Most people are not prepared for this next phase. We must now confront a truth that very few spiritual teachers are willing to discuss. There is a profound phenomenon that occurs after a quantum archetype stabilizes that most people are completely unprepared for. You need to understand that not all synchronicities are pleasant, comfortable, or wanted by your ego, because the activated archetype organizes your experience toward archetypal expression and evolutionary purpose, and not toward your ego's comfort or preference. The flow can sometimes feel like a storm. Sometimes, synchronicities manifest as challenging circumstances, unwanted endings, or difficult initiations. These events serve the development of the archetype, even though your ego experiences them as problems, disasters, or failures rather than blessings. When the synchronistic flow includes these difficulties, your consciousness must be mature enough to recognize that the archetype serves an evolution far beyond your personal agenda. The discomfort manifests as synchronistic obstacles appearing precisely when your ego wants a different outcome. You intend for comfort, but a challenge synchronistically manifests to test you. You desire stability, but radical change arrives through perfect timing. You prefer avoiding conflict, but a confrontation appears through an orchestrated encounter that you cannot escape. From the limited perspective of the ego, these look like your manifestation is failing. It looks like the universe has turned against you. But from the archetypal perspective, the view from the quantum field, these are simply the field organizing circumstances to develop a capacity you lack. It is forcing growth that the ego would avoid forever, if given the choice. This is why beloved patterns often end synchronistically when the ego desperately wants them to continue. A relationship that no longer serves the archetypal expression ends through perfectly timed circumstances that the ego is powerless to prevent. A career that constrains your development collapses through a synchronistic sequence of events that you did not create. An identity that limits your emergence dissolves through a crisis that seems devastating but is actually creating the necessary vacuum for a fuller expression. These endings are orchestrated by the quantum field, responding to an archetypal pattern that has outgrown the limiting circumstances you were clinging to. These are initiations. They require an ego death that feels like destruction but is actually liberation. Think about the mechanics of the archetypes themselves. When the warrior archetype needs deepening, a battle appears. It tests courage beyond the comfort zone. When the healer archetype needs strengthening, a personal wounding manifests, requiring a self-healing journey that deepens the capacity to heal others. When the teacher archetype needs expansion, a confrontation with ignorance appears, revealing the limits of current understanding. These initiations are not punishments, they are requirements. They are archetypal development demanding challenges that force consciousness beyond its current capacity into a fuller expression of potential. The practice during these difficult synchronicities is to recognize the purpose rather than resisting the pain. When an obstacle appears synchronistically, ask yourself, how does this serve the activated archetype? When a relationship ends through perfect timing, ask, what limitation is this ending releasing me from? When an initiation creates suffering, ask, what capacity is being developed through this fire? The difficulty has meaning. The challenge serves a purpose. The suffering develops consciousness in ways that comfort never could. Resisting only makes the suffering worse. Recognizing the archetypal purpose allows you to work with the difficulty rather than fighting against an orchestration that is serving an evolution you cannot yet see. You must also learn to distinguish between a true archetypal synchronicity and your ego's manifestation attempts gone wrong. There is a nuance here. If an obstacle appears through synchronistic precision, with perfect timing, a meaningful pattern, and a clear connection to the archetypal theme, it is likely the field organizing a challenge that serves your development. However, if an obstacle appears through the ego's scattered focus, manifesting fear, random timing, chaotic patterns, and a disconnection from the theme, it is likely unconscious manifestation creating an unwanted outcome. The distinction matters. Archetypal synchronicity deserves recognition and cooperation. The ego's scattered manifestation deserves redirection through conscious focus. I experienced this harsh lesson myself, 2 years after the teacher archetype activated in my life. I wanted to continue teaching in a comfortable, familiar format that I had established. I was safe there, but synchronistically, circumstances dismantled that format completely. The venue became unavailable through bizarre timing. I could not control students departing through their own orchestrated life changes. The structure collapsed through a perfect sequence of events. Initially, I thought my manifestation powers had turned against me. I panicked, but eventually, I recognized that the archetype was orchestrating the destruction of a limiting format. It was forcing an evolution into a fuller teaching expression that the comfortable, familiar structure was preventing. My ego wanted preservation. The archetype demanded evolution. The synchronicity served the archetype regardless of my preference. When I finally stopped resisting and asked what was trying to emerge, a new teaching format revealed itself, one that was more aligned with the archetypal pattern, more effective for the purpose and impossible to develop while I was clinging to the old ways. You must understand that what is happening individually as your quantum archetype activates is also happening collectively to thousands of people globally. This is not an isolated phenomenon affecting random individuals. This is a species-wide archetypal awakening. Humanity is activating diverse archetypes simultaneously as consciousness evolves. We are creating a collective field where multiple archetypal patterns organize reality, rather than a single dominant pattern controlling civilization. We are reaching a tipping point where enough humans act as nodes for these archetypes that the collective archetypal field becomes active rather than dormant. This organizes collective circumstances through synchronistic patterns at a scale consciousness has not experienced for millennia. The biologist Rupert Sheldrake calls this morphic resonance, and it explains why archetypal activation is accelerating right now. As more consciousnesses activate a specific archetype, the morphic field strengthens. It makes activation easier for others who are approaching resonance with that pattern. The first person who activated the healer archetype in the modern era did so through pure, grueling individual development without any support from an active morphic field. It was like hacking a path through a dense jungle with a dull machete. The second person found activation easier because the first person's activation had strengthened the field. Now, with thousands having activated the healer archetype, the field contains powerful patterns supporting activation for anyone whose consciousness reaches the appropriate frequency and coherence. The path is already cut. The highway is built. The same dynamic is operating for every archetype. The warrior, the creator, the teacher, the sage, the sovereign, all of them are strengthening as more individuals activate. You are benefiting right now from everyone who activated your archetype before you. You benefit from the ancient practitioners who embodied the archetype powerfully, from the modern pioneers who reactivated dormant patterns, and from thousands of ordinary people who have strengthened the morphic field through their expression. They created the pattern. They proved activation is real. They demonstrated that consciousness can align with archetypal frequency and experience the synchronistic flow that activation creates. Their achievement makes your activation easier, more supported, and more likely to express fully, rather than remaining a partial activation that your consciousness struggles to maintain. And here is the beautiful responsibility. When your archetype activates, when you express that pattern consciously, and when you allow the quantum field to organize experience around that activation, you strengthen the morphic field for everyone else. You are paying it forward. Your expression serves the collective. It makes activation easier for the next consciousness. You contribute to an archetypal awakening where humanity operates from diverse, activated patterns rather than dormant, unconscious confusion. You are not just experiencing a personal transformation. You are participating in a collective archetypal renaissance where our species recovers the capacity to align with quantum patterns that organize reality meaningfully. But there is something else occurring at the collective level that makes this moment unique in history. Multiple archetypes are activating simultaneously. This creates a diversity of patterns organizing reality rather than a single pattern dominating everything. In the past, a single archetype often dominated civilization. We had the warrior during conquest periods, the sovereign during empire building, or the merchant during commercial expansion. But now, we have diverse archetypes activating simultaneously. Healers, teachers, creators, sages, warriors, lovers, fools, sovereigns, all expressing in the same historical moment. All of them are contributing different organizing patterns to the collective field. This diversity creates a richer, more complex collective reality than a single dominant archetype could ever organize. This diversity is necessary for collective evolution. The challenges facing our species require multiple archetypal responses. We need warrior courage, healer compassion, teacher wisdom, creator innovation, sage perspective, and sovereign leadership, all contributing simultaneously rather than sequentially. Your archetypal activation is not just a personal achievement to put on your spiritual resume. Your activation is a contribution to a diverse collective archetypal field that humanity needs active to navigate the current evolutionary transition. The archetype you are expressing is needed now, otherwise it would not have activated. The field activates what is required, when it is required. Your activation serves a timing larger than your personal development. This is why you must share this transmission. Others are experiencing this synchronistic flow, but do not have the framework to understand that it is archetypal activation causing the orchestration. Others have an activated archetype, but doubt the activation, because our culture says synchronicity is just coincidence. Others need to know that the quantum archetype is a real pattern in the field, and that activation creates sustained synchronistic flow. Nothing happens by accident when an archetypal pattern is organizing experience consistently. Recognition normalizes what is occurring. Validation supports conscious alignment rather than unconscious expression. There is a choice approaching you that determines whether this archetypal activation becomes a permanent expression or a temporary phenomenon. Your consciousness will eventually face a crossroads. You are standing at a threshold. The choice you are approaching is binary. It is the decision between maintaining the conditions that support this high-frequency activation, elevated consciousness, internal coherence, and conscious alignment, or allowing those conditions to degrade. If you choose the latter, your consciousness will drop below the threshold where archetypal resonance can sustain itself. This is often a painful choice. It forces you to decide between expressing the archetype fully, even when it feels uncomfortable and risky, or limiting your expression to the safe, known territory of the ego. The ego is a master of control, but control weakens the signal until the quantum field can no longer respond consistently. You cannot make this choice from the level of the ego, because the ego has a fundamental conflict of interest. The ego wants to hijack the archetype. It wants to use this new power as a tool for achieving personal goals, for gaining social status, or for building an identity that gets applauded and validated by the world. But using an archetype egoically creates massive interference in the field. The ego's agenda conflicts with the archetypal purpose. The ego's fear limits the expression. The ego's desperate attachment to specific outcomes prevents the necessary surrender to the field's orchestration. The more the ego tries to control the archetypal expression, the weaker the signal becomes. Eventually, it drops below the threshold where clear activation can be maintained. The ego effectively kills the archetype by trying to possess what should flow freely. The choice must come from a level of consciousness that recognizes a larger purpose. The archetype did not activate to serve your small self. The archetype activated because your consciousness reached a developmental stage where your expression serves collective evolution. The purpose is transpersonal, even though the expression is deeply personal. When consciousness serves the archetype, rather than trying to use the archetype for the ego's benefit, the activation strengthens. When the ego dominates and tries to force the archetype to serve a personal agenda, the activation withers. This is the ancient distinction between serving divine will versus pursuing personal ambition. Divine will is simply the archetypal pattern serving collective evolution. Personal ambition is the ego craving power, recognition, and reward. When the ego hijacks archetypal energy, the connection weakens and the synchronistic flow dries up. It is not that the archetype abandons you, it is that the ego's interference creates signal degradation. You are essentially jamming your own broadcast. This choice becomes easier when you clearly recognize the cost. Maintaining activation requires ongoing commitment to frequency, coherence, and service. Losing it happens through neglect, through slipping back into unconscious habits, avoiding discomfort, and serving only the self. I faced this precise crossroads 3 years after the teacher archetype activated in my life. My ego, clever as it is, wanted to use the teaching platform for building a reputation, for securing financial safety, and for being recognized as an expert. Those motivations created static. The teaching became a performance for the ego rather than a service from the archetype. The results were immediate and undeniable. The synchronistic flow reduced to a trickle. Opportunities manifested less consistently. Students stopped appearing organically. I realized that my ego was suffocating the archetypal connection by trying to use it for personal advancement. I had to choose: serve the archetype by teaching from a purpose beyond recognition, or serve the ego by using the teaching for benefit. I chose the archetype. I chose teaching as service rather than identity building. I chose to express the pattern even when the ego wanted a different reward, and that choice restored the flow immediately. The synchronicities returned. The resources aligned perfectly. Why? Because my consciousness stopped interfering. Once the quantum archetype stabilizes as a permanent expression rather than a temporary activation, life looks radically different. It is not necessarily easier. In fact, it is often more demanding because the archetype requires capacities beyond your comfort zone. But it is infinitely more meaningful. You are living a life that feels orchestrated rather than random. Living from an activated archetype means trusting synchronistic guidance over rational planning. The ego loves to plan. It wants to control outcomes and ensure safety through prediction. But archetypal expression flows through synchronicity, through field orchestration, and through trusting what appears rather than forcing what you want. You set the intention, you embody the quality, and then you allow the field to orchestrate the how. Your purpose becomes crystal clear. It shifts from an abstract aspiration to a concrete geometric reality. Express this specific archetype. Embody these particular qualities. This clarity is not limiting, it is focusing. You stop trying to do everything and start doing the one thing you are here to do powerfully. Everything becomes a vehicle for that expression. Every relationship, every encounter, every situation becomes an opportunity to embody the frequency. Relationships reorganize around archetypal compatibility. You stop attracting people through the ego's need for validation and start magnetizing people through the archetypal frequency you are broadcasting. These connections feel destined. They serve the purpose. Challenges are recognized as initiations. When difficulty appears, you know it is the field orchestrating an upgrade in your capacity. The warrior faces battles to develop courage. The healer faces wounds to deepen compassion. You stop resisting the training. Legacy becomes a natural outcome rather than a forced effort. You are not trying to build a monument to your ego. You are expressing a pattern that naturally creates an impact that outlives your physical form. The teacher creates a transmission of wisdom that continues affecting consciousness long after the body is gone. The healer creates ripples of restoration. The creator produces works that influence generations. The legacy is the pattern itself, expressing through you. There comes a point where quantum archetype activation becomes an irreversible developmental stage. You cannot unknow the archetype once it has activated. You can temporarily lose clear expression if you fall into shadow, but the pattern remains accessible because your consciousness has permanently developed the frequency structure for resonance. This permanence happens because your identity reorganizes around the archetypal purpose. Before activation, your identity was a construction of the ego, a collection of roles, achievements, and beliefs. After activation, identity is a discovery. You recognize the pattern you align with at the quantum level. You realize, I am an expression of this archetype. This is not a role, It is your essence. You cannot maintain a purely ego-driven life once the archetype is active. Attempts to pursue goals incompatible with the archetype create increasing discomfort and synchronistic resistance. Choosing against the archetype feels like betraying your own soul. It is not that you lose free will. It is that choosing against your essence creates profound suffering that is impossible to sustain. You also develop a synchronistic sensitivity that was not accessible before. You perceive patterns others miss. You sense the orchestration that others dismiss as coincidence. You recognize archetypal themes in circumstances that others experience as random noise. This sensitivity is your consciousness perceiving the quantum field's organizational patterns in real time. You see the matrix. You see how the field organizes reality around frequency. Ancient teachings described this as finding your dharma. We now understand it as recognizing the archetypal pattern your consciousness incarnated to express. Underlying all your surface activities is a single archetypal pattern that gives continuity and meaning to your entire life trajectory. Before activation, life felt like a series of random events. After activation, life reveals itself as the unfolding of a single, coherent masterpiece. 6 years after my activation, I cannot return to living without this organizing principle. I cannot unsee how the field responds to frequency. This activation is a permanent transformation of identity from the ego-constructed self to the archetype-recognized essence. If you are sensing this permanent stabilization occurring within you, I want you to claim it. This is not an aspiration for the future. It is a recognition of the transformation that is already happening. Your consciousness has discovered its essence. Your identity has reorganized. Your life is being lived from archetypal expression. Every concept we have explored points toward recognizing quantum patterns operating in your direct experience right now. We are moving away from dismissing things as coincidence or wishful thinking. We are moving toward conscious alignment. You are not just learning concepts here. You are activating quantum patterns. You are learning to align with frequencies that organize reality. Everything shared until now has been pointing toward this specific moment. This is not about a moment in the distant future. It is about this moment right now, where you either recognize that the archetype has already activated, or you prepare your consciousness for the activation that is approaching. It is the moment where synchronistic patterns become visible as orchestration. It is the moment where purpose reveals itself from behind the ego's mask. Take a deep breath, a deep one. As you breathe, reflect on the patterns operating in your experience. What theme keeps appearing? What qualities do people project onto you? What opportunities manifest consistently? If a clear pattern emerges from your honest examination, the archetype aligned with that pattern has likely activated. The signs are there. The orchestration is occurring. The only question remaining is whether your consciousness recognizes what is operating or continues to dismiss the patterns as meaningless. In the coming days, track your synchronicities consciously. When a meaningful coincidence occurs, notice the theme. When an opportunity appears, check its alignment. When a person responds to you, notice the frequency they are perceiving. This tracking makes the unconscious conscious. It reveals the pattern that has been organizing your experience all along. Once your quantum archetype activates, nothing happens by accident. Not eventually, not sometimes, constantly. Every circumstance is organized meaningfully. Every encounter is orchestrated purposefully. Every synchronicity reflects the pattern back to you so you can express it more fully. The accidents you experience are actually synchronicities you are not recognizing yet. The randomness is actually orchestration. You are not seeing coincidences. You are seeing the quantum field responding to the frequency you are broadcasting. If this transmission has helped you recognize that archetypal activation has occurred for you, if the patterns have become visible as orchestration, then you have a responsibility to anchor this realization. Others are out there experiencing this flow, but have no framework to understand it. They think they are going crazy, or they doubt the magic because the world tells them it is not real. They need to know that the quantum archetype is a real pattern in the field. They need to know that activation creates sustained organization. Nothing happens by accident when the archetypal frequency is broadcasting coherently. I want you to make a final declaration to anchor this in your reality. Write this in the comments below. Archetype activated, synchronicity constant. That statement acknowledges the recognition. It tells your consciousness that the pattern is active. It confirms that the quantum field is organizing your experience. It affirms that nothing happens by accident anymore because everything is arising from the field responding to your frequency. You are broadcasting through resonance. This is your quantum reflex. This is archetypal activation creating sustained flow. You are not imagining the orchestration. You are perceiving actual quantum dynamics. You are seeing the field respond to you. Welcome to archetypal activation. Welcome to the synchronistic flow. Welcome to an orchestrated reality where accidents are impossible and everything serves a purpose beyond the ego's understanding. If you are ready to expand your consciousness and step into your next quantum leap, subscribe now, leave a comment below, and share this message with someone ready to awaken.